Hey there, it's Mitzi. Welcome to my channel. Today I am continuing my 5-book Friday series. And I must say that I'm enjoying this because I'm going through my shelves and just reminiscing about all the great books that I have on my shelf. And so this is fun. I really like looking back at the different books that have formed me as a reader. And today's is a little different, but bear with me. I hope that I will convey what I'm trying to say. But first, before I do that, there's two things. The first thing is, if there is a 5-book Friday idea that you would like for me to share, maybe a genre or a topic, whatever it might be, let me know in the comments and I will look through and see if I have books that pertain to that genre or topic or whatever. So I would love to, maybe an author or whatever it is that you are just interested in me sharing about, let me know in the comments. And so even if I haven't read that, I might challenge myself to read them and then discuss them in this series. So let me know in the comments about that. I'm always looking for ideas. So thank you for all the comments too. And that's what leads to number 2 is thank you to BookTube, because over the past few years I have been watching so many booktubers, and that's why I joined myself and this community that we are building here. And the comments, the suggestions of books, the comments about different books, just talking about books in general has helped me to evaluate my own reading life, and it has just sparked even more joy in my reading because I'm sharing it with other people. And in my home here, in my community physically, I don't have people to really talk about the books that I read. We just, when I'm out and about, I'm not talking to people about books. But in this community, it's a special bond that I really love. And I just love that we all come together, no matter what our backgrounds or our taste or whatever. We can just find the love of reading in general a way to connect us together. And I'm really enjoying that, especially lately. It's really been a comfort for me. So thank you for that. So today, my 5-book Friday is 5 books that surprised me. And these books have surprised me in all different kinds of ways. And some of them are kind of silly, but bear with me because there is a reason that I'm sharing them on this list. Now, there's a lot of books that have surprised me, but these books surprised me in 5 different kinds of ways and helped me discover more things about my own reading and challenge me a little bit. So that's why I'm sharing these 5 books that surprised me. So the first one on this list is Eden's Outcast by John Maddison. Now this is a look at Louisa May Alcott and her father, and I heard about this on BookTube a couple of years ago, and I really wasn't interested in reading a biography about Louisa May Alcott and her father until I saw this book. The first reason I wanted to read it was because it was hyped up. Whoever talked about it sold me on it. They made it sound very interesting. But the other reason was, right here it shows that it was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and I'm always interested in why books win these so-called prestigious awards. So whenever there is an award on a book, I'm like, okay, what is it that made that an award winner? And I'm a writer too, so that might have a lot of the reasons why I look at those kind of books, because I'm always like, okay, what made the judges love this so much? What resonated with them? So anyway, that was the 2 main reasons I chose to read it. But the reason that it's on this list as one that surprised me was I have never been one to read a lot of biographies. Now, when I was in school, we were assigned biographies by a lot of our language arts teachers, and maybe that's why. They were good books and I enjoyed them, but it just wasn't something that I gravitated toward. Except for books about writers. Now, I know this is about writers, but I wasn't really interested in writers' lives as much as I was their writing routines. And I have a whole section of nonfiction on writing. And I'm always interested in how a person writes, but not necessarily their lives. And so when I read this book, it changed that for me. And so for the past few years, I have been reading a whole lot more biographies about writers, because I'm like, okay, this is the reason they're writers. You know what I mean? And so that just fascinates me. Anyway, this particular book, the reason I loved it so much, it's about Louisa May Alcott and her father. It starts with her father, and the man was crazy. I'll just say, I don't even know how Louisa May Alcott survived, because the man was crazy and he about starved his family to death. But what was so fascinating about it was it read like a novel. It was such a page turner. And it showed me that I've just been reading the wrong biographies. In the past, when I would read a biography, it just wasn't the quality writing that I needed. Because this book, I can see why it won the Pulitzer, because it reads like a novel. It's fascinating. I could not put it down. And I wanted to know every detail about these people. Now, granted, he was crazy, and that fascinated me too, because the man was wackadoodle. But there were other things about it too, like he lived in an area with other writers from that time period, and I was fascinated by that as a writer of, wouldn't that be amazing to live in this community where there are so many writers, thriving writers that are successful writers, and they're there to critique your work and talk to you about your work and, you know, just sharing your thoughts. So I thought that was fascinating as well. So this book surprised me in that I didn't realize it would be an all-time favorite. I mean, this is at the top. I loved this book, and I never thought that nonfiction could be something that I loved as much as my fiction. Now, I do have some spiritual nonfiction that I've read that's up there, but this was not that. This is academic kind of reading, and it was amazing, and it just changed my view on choosing some of these other books in this genre. So I loved it. It really did surprise me. Now, the next one on this list, okay, bear with me because this is probably absurd. But I was reading this book because, as I said earlier, I read a lot of books about writing. This is nonfiction written by Stephen King, and it is about his writing horror fiction and the study of horror fiction. And I don't even read horror, but I was reading it because of writing. It was about writing, and I just devour books about writing. And so it was really interesting. And so at the very beginning of this story, it's not a story. In the very beginning of this book, he is talking about, he just casually mentions this book called Donovan's Brain. Now, this is a naked hardcover. I'm sure at one time it had a beautiful dust jacket on it. But he talked about this book called Donovan's Brain by Kurt Siodmak or something like that. I'm not sure. And he just casually mentioned it, and he just kind of a couple of sentences described the premise of this book. And I stopped what I was reading, and I wrote it down and said, I'm going to start looking for that book. And thankfully, I found it. And I do not know why in the world the premise fascinated me so much, because this is the dumbest book I have ever read in my life, but I loved it. It is about this man who, he is a scientist, and he is trying to figure out how to take a brain out of a body and make it survive and live without a body. I know, it's silly. When was this even written? Let's see. This was written in 1942. I don't have my glasses. I think it's 42, 43. So it's pulp fiction, basically. So anyway, the scientist, and keep in mind that I'm not recommending this book, but just bear with me. So he is the scientist trying to keep this brain alive. So he tries it with a monkey and stuff, and then one day he comes across this man who, I think it's a helicopter. It might be a plane, but he crashes, and it's Donovan, this millionaire. And he takes the body, and before the man dies, he takes his brain out and puts it in a jar. I know, it's stupid. And so then, throughout the story, as it continues, the brain starts taking over this scientist. And he starts doing all these things for the brain. It is absurd, it's silly, it's stupid. I know that. But I could not stop reading it. I could not stop reading it. And I had so much fun reading this absurd book. I mean, it's over the top, it's pulp fiction, but it surprised me how much I enjoyed it. And it taught me something about myself. That sometimes it is okay for me to pick up something cheesy or silly and just read it just for the fun of it. And I had, at the time that I read this, I was frustrated with my own writing. I was reading a lot of books that were on this list of the greatest books to read. I was reading a lot of things, nonfiction for writers, and I just needed to remember why I read in the first place, and that is just to have fun and enjoy the reading. And I had become just too serious about my reading. So this came at the right time. And so that's why it's on this list. I know it's a super silly book. I do not recommend it. But I will always keep this because it was so much fun. And it showed me that sometimes I need to just pick up a book that is silly, that is, you know, just off the wall absurd, and just enjoy it for the sake of a fun story. And so I have really tried to do that. You know, when I started BookTube too, I started getting back into that. I was like, okay, you know, I've got to be a serious reader now because I'm, you know, filming and I'm sharing these books. And at first I was kind of pressuring myself, and then I was like, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't want you as the viewer to feel pressured to read things that you're not going to enjoy. I want you to read whatever you want to read and have fun doing it. And so I had to really kind of step back and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read whatever I want to and not apologize for that. So I learned that about myself, that it's fun to sometimes pick up something at random and just enjoy the fun of reading. Okay, so the next one on my list of 5 books that surprised me is a beautiful book called Out of the Dust by Karen Hess. Now, this was a Newbery Award winner, and I read this when I was teaching 3rd grade. I taught school. If you have never watched any of my videos before, in my previous life, I taught school. I taught in the public school system for many years, and I really loved it, and I taught 3rd grade the entire time. And so every day, you know, I was reading aloud, and we read some fantastic books, and that just made me happy because they love the books too. And one of the things that I started doing was reading a lot of the Newbery books, because that is a children's award for great literature in children's fiction. And so this was one of the books I read during that time. Now, I was not drawn to reading this. This is about the Dust Bowl. And I thought, okay, this is going to be depressing. And then when I looked at it, it is written in lyrical format. It is a lyrical story. And I was not interested in that at all. I thought, there is no way I'm going to sit there and read a bunch of poems to try to link together to tell a story. But I wanted to read all the Newberys, and so I read it. And this book had me in tears. It was such a beautiful story, and the words are just gorgeous and moved me in such a way. So after reading this, I realized what surprised me was that I love lyrical prose. I didn't know that I did, but I love a book written in this lyrical format. And so now I'm always on the hunt for another one. I haven't found one that I love quite as much as this one, but I'm always looking for it because I know that there are more out there. So if you know of some that are written like this, let me know. But this book just was amazing, and it was such a beautiful book. It of course didn't take long to read, but I think I took longer because I just sat on it and, you know, read it slowly and let it marinate because it was such beautiful writing. So that surprised me because I never thought that I would enjoy this type of writing before I read this book. So if you have never tried Out of the Dust or a book written in a lyrical format, I really suggest trying it. Just see if you like it. Okay, the next one on my list of books that surprised me was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, I didn't think I would like this book at all, but I do like Gothic literature, and so the reason I read this one was because it is in every list that I see about Gothic literature, Gothic classics, Gothic fiction you should read. It always has Frankenstein listed, and so I put it off for many years, and a few years ago I picked it up, and I think actually one of my family members gave me this copy for Christmas that year, and so The next year I read it, and I was amazed. This is one of the best books I've ever read. It was not at all what I thought it would be, and that's why it surprised me. I was surprised at how I thought I knew a story, but I did not know it. The Frankenstein that I have seen in every movie, all these little TV episodes that you see at Halloween, is not the Frankenstein of this story. First of all, Frankenstein is not the monster, which he is the monster. The man is the monster to me in the story. But this story is so much deeper than that. There are so many topics, themes in this story that are way deeper than this book can even convey. There are things that it talks about that make you think about how we act and how we should take responsibility for our actions and human nature and alienation and isolation, all those things. It's just a wonderful piece of work. I loved this book, and I was so surprised at how much I did enjoy it. And when you think, oh, that's horror or whatever, so of course I didn't want to read it. It's not horror to me. It wasn't, I mean, it's scary, but it's not scary like you're going to stay up at night and look over your shoulder, that kind of thing. But it's beautifully written, first of all. But it's one of those books you want to go back and reread and really study and talk about. This is a great buddy read. If you've never read it, I say grab someone else and assign, a chapter or two here and there, and buddy read this with someone so you can discuss it, because it goes way deeper than that weird looking green guy that we see on movies. So Frankenstein surprised me because it showed me that I cannot assume anything about a book. When someone gives me, suggestions for a book, I can go by what they say, but they're giving their opinion on the book. And there's a lot of times that we will watch these movie adaptations, and it will not be the book at all. Or it'll be parts of the book, but they take it in a totally different direction than what the author intended. So, the whole reading a book because it's popular or whatever, sure, do that. But make sure that you're not judging a book based on what society is saying about it. Because so many times we do that. This book's controversial for whatever reason. And then you read it and you're like, huh? What's so controversial about that? Or maybe you read it because everybody says it's great, and then you think, this book is horrible. You know what I mean? So always read the book and judge for yourself based on your own experiences and the things that you're passionate about. So that's what I learned from Frankenstein, and it is great, and I think everyone should read it. And it's Gothic, and I love that. And the final book that started this whole thing, this is the reason that I even wanted to share 5 books that surprised me, because this book surprised me more than any book I've ever read. And it is Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. Now, this book is, I had never read Barbara Pym. I had never even heard of Barbara Pym. And several years ago, before all the lockdowns and all those things, I was at a library sale and I saw this book. It is the ugliest cover I have ever seen in my life. I don't even know why I picked the book up. And I had never heard of Barbara Pym. But there were these books out, and I think this one was actually in the classics. And I thought, Quartet in Autumn, what in the world's that? And to be honest, I thought this book was about a quartet, some musical group in October or something. Honestly, that's what I thought it was. And so I thought, okay, I'll read it. I don't know what it is. Had the ugliest cover. I normally am one of these book cover snob people that I don't like to pick up books with other ugly covers because I'm visual and I like to see a pretty cover. But for some reason it was like $1, and I just put it in the bag because it was so many books for so much or whatever. And I was so surprised by this book. But here's the thing. I read this book in the summer that year because I picked this up in the wintertime. I read it this summer and I didn't like it. I finished that book and I felt so uncomfortable, and I could not figure out for the life of me why in the world I was so uncomfortable with this book. And so I kept thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more this book became one of the best books ever. And the book is about these 4 people. It is a quartet in autumn, and it's not talking about a musical quartet. They're not a barbershop quartet. But it's the autumn of their lives. It's about these 4 people who work in this office. I don't even know if it tells what they do, but they work in this small office space together, and they've worked together for years, but they have surface relationships. There's no, getting together or anything. And so a couple of them are going to retire, and so it's 2 men and 2 women, and they're going to retire, and so they kind of get together. It's like, okay, we need to do something because they're retiring, and the whole situation is awkward because they do not have a relationship outside the workplace. So when they do try to get together to do something with each other, like go to dinner or lunch or whatever, it's so awkward. It's just this awkward situation, and it just made me feel uncomfortable. And there's a couple of places where one of them goes to the other's house and just kind of stands outside the door. They want to go talk to them, or maybe they feel like they're obligated to check on them. They don't know how to do it. It's just really awkward. And it's about 4 lonely people. One is like completely by themselves. One is like they have family, but they don't see about them. It's those kind of things. One is basically kicked out of their home. It's sad. It's very sad and uncomfortable. And so by the end of the book, I just didn't know how I felt. And so when I got through with it, I thought, okay, what is it about this book that's making me so uncomfortable? And I realized that it was making me uncomfortable because it was making me think about things in my own life and how I treat other people, and how I am one of those people that kind of isolates myself. And so I learned a lot about myself and the importance of community, and not just assuming things about people. And so it really was a life-changing sort of book for that. It's a simple little book, and it's got a lot of funny parts in it, but it was a serious book. And so I had never read Barbara Pym. I do plan on reading more. I have heard, though, that this book is not a book like her other books. I think she wrote this book, it was a dark time in her own life, so maybe that's why it reads that way. It's not that it's depressing. It's just, I don't know. It's just sad. And it's a book that I have thought about more than probably most of the books on my shelf. And so that was the whole reason I wanted to do this 5 books that surprised me, because this ugly covered book by someone I had never heard about was the best book that I had read that year. And even more than that, after I finished it, I thought I hated the book. But now that I think back on it, I realize it was because it made me uncomfortable is why I didn't like the book to begin with. So those are the books on my 5 books that surprised me. And I do hope that you'll pick this book up. I don't want you to think that it's going to depress you, and just, it's an important book, and I loved it. And I've heard other people say that they don't like it as much as her other books. And so that actually gives me hope. I mean, I'm cheering for this one, but it gives me hope that there's some great ones out there by Barbara Pym for me to read. So those are the books on my 5 books that surprised me. Is there a book on your shelf or that you've read in the past that surprised you more than any other? Let me know in the comments, and let me know what it was about that book that surprised you most. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.